they're copies of the original, but Hawaii spent a lot of money reprinting and reproducing the exact size, the exact content, and the exact everything. And we have about 4 or 5 of them at the museum. And it's really amazing. But okay, here we go. So let's start now. So here we are. So we're starting off. She's born in 1872. Oh, look, what? We're 22. So it was last year, what, 150 years ago? I mean, yeah, last year. 150 years ago, right? So we start off with her childhood and the growing years in Pennsylvania. All right, so here we go. And so she's born August 10th, so that's coming up, 1871 in Richmond, Ohio. So let's just go there and let's take a look at it. So born in North America, right? And we're zooming in, and that Dwayne really is a sweetheart. And you notice that he's zooming in, so we know where you know where she is. And hang on, we're getting closer. We're getting closer, and there we are. All right. So there you say Lake Erie and Cambridge Springs. Then in this is the exact location. Now here you go. Here you now have the Root family home from 1870. So she was 20. She was 20 when she left home. Uh, I want to mention, and I don't know if Dwayne will mention that in here. Martha Root was never married, as you know, and she had no children. And it all goes back in Hawaii. Every so often we would touch on this story, but we wouldn't dwell on the story. But she was a very audacious girl. She was a bit of a tomboy, to be honest. She loved motor car racing, and so she was very sort of outgoing, shall I say. But one day she took a bicycle ride, and she had a terrible accident, and the accident left her not being able to have any children, and it was really the tragedy of her life. And she always sort of had to deal with that. And one of the reasons she decided not to get married is because she didn't have any couldn't have any children. And to her, she had to adjust to her life. You know, how would she give meaning to her life? Okay, so here we are. This is Timothy T. Root, born 1837. He died in 22. He died last 100 years ago, last year. See what I mean? So this is sort of kind of coming together. Anyway, that's her father, and and there she is as this beautiful young woman. People call her, sometimes they say, oh well, she was somewhat dowdy. I don't see that. I think she had a beautiful face. I think she had lovely features. She was modest in her appearance, but she always had cute haircuts. So so here we go. Then so she becomes educated and goes to Oberlin College, right? And oops, there we go. And there's some of the classmates, and you notice here she is at the bottom left. How cool is this? So here we have a college of the girls, so to speak, in Oberlin College. Now, around 1900 now, she goes and she graduates, and she goes to Pittsburgh. Now, you got to realize at that time, the big deal was a horseless carriage. The internal combustion engine was now coming about in 1893. So Martha really is coming about as motor cars are becoming the item, right? And she was just fascinated with that. And by 1908 to 1920 to 1923, she now begins her travels, basically her global travels. So from '08 to 23, This is why we're celebrating the centenary, right? 1923, 2023. But really, she started it in 1908. And so, okay, let's go. Here we go. So she is an editor, society and religion editor of the Pittsburgh Post. For a woman, that was quite a prestigious and being out there. One of the things that I know that we forever talked about, there was this famous motor car exhibit and race in France, and needless to say, dear Martha, she could hardly wait to get there, and report it and then talk about it. But you notice that, let me just go back, it wasn't just that she was a society religious editor, but she was also a religious editor. And so she had an interest, but obviously as yet had sort of met her destiny. So one day, here we go, 1908. This is so cool. I love this story. After one of the events that she attended as an editor, she ends up in Charles Restaurant in Pittsburgh. So I don't know if that restaurant's still available over there, but anybody in Pittsburgh, please, shall we find that restaurant? And let's Google it to see if we can find it, because that would be very cool to have that. And she is sitting on a table next to Roy Wilhelm in Dodge, and she hears him talking of being a religious editor. She obviously hears him talking about the Baha'i faith. And one of her thoughts that came through her was, it seems to be such a pity, because she wasn't really a religious person. It seems such a pity that all of the heathens must be lost. She sort of thought, well, there's a trouble. You have some people that are very religious, but the heathens must be lost, right? Now, let us not overlook that statement, because today the new atheist feels the same way. Look at those poor religious, old-time religion folks. They're really lost, because this is 2023. It's kind of a reverse thinking today, because the growing up, young atheist, agnostic, new agers, spiritual but not religious, they kind of feel the same way in reverse, right? But here you go, you have Roy Wilhelm on the right and Roy's mother on the left. They met those of other religions who also said their prayers and led kind, helpful lives. So they were obviously, the Wilhelms came from a religious family, as you can tell. So this was her business card. It's what it looked like. Martha Root, Society and Religious Editor, Pittsburgh Post, 223 Carlton Square, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So now you know that, and now you know what her business card looks like, okay? And Martha passed on the books to those known for queer religious notions. Oh, these cults, and she thought, nah, I'm not really into these strange cultures arriving in America, because remember, it was a mostly Protestant country. 1893, you have the very first World Columbia Exposition, World Parliament of Religions. So by 1893, you had now for the first time Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists partaking in the World Parliament of Religions. And I'm sure Martha must have thought, well, those are queer little religions. We're a Protestant country, and so therefore, no, thank you. But, it really sort of gave the birth to introducing this Protestant country to religions other than Christianity and Catholicism. Now, what happens then, she meets back up again in Farmer's Restaurant, another place that we really feel, we need to want to look at, right? Farmer's Restaurant, Pittsburgh, 1909. So now she meets with Roy Wilhelm, and she wants to find all about it. She's becoming curious now. And she now seriously wants to take a look. And there you have it, the first 2-hour fireside. In 1908, she comes in, she meets Roy Wilhelm. By 1909, this girl, God, listen to me. And this is recorded. I want to apologize to the recording. And so, therefore, Cameron's got a camera pointing at this, so we have something. By 1909, she begins to give her first firesides. You notice she's still in Pittsburgh. She's out there and she's inviting people, and she is beginning to talk about this and seeing that she's a religious editor. What does she do? Because she's part of the Pittsburgh Post. And there she is, Baha'is regard all religions as one. Picture of Abdu'l-Baha. I mean, how cool is that? And there you can have it, and you can, it may sound unlikely that the identity of this Persian nobleman who lived from 1870, you know what I mean? And this goes to drugs, and I wish, and when you get a copy of this slide, you read through all the various wonderful articles, that we have here, and she goes, it's an intriguing fact that each major world religion, Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, has given birth to this great civilization. These historic civilizations all have certain things in common. She clearly is preparing herself. Now remember, this is 1909. The divine plan hasn't come out yet. Okay? So she's still in her career, all right? And so then she now goes later in Chicago. Martha was now introduced to Thornton Chase. He confirmed her in the faith. Thornton Chase became the first Baha'i in 1894. This is 1909, okay? So she'd heard about it from Roy Wilhelm, because remember, during the time of Abdu'l-Baha, there was no formal enrollment process. And eventually, what the Baha'is would find out, that Abdu'l-Baha is in Haifa and Akka. And then you can write to him and you can tell him, I'm one of them. And then they would write letters, and then Abdu'l-Baha would write a letter back. And that was kind of the way of enrollment. It's not really until the Guardian comes along that then brings about the formal process. But I want to say one thing. This is 1909. 1905, Thornton Chase, and I'm sidetracking here, but I want to put it in perspective. In 1900 and 1901, Thornton Chase is already driving up and down through Washington, state of Washington. By 1905, he and Nathan Fitzgerald, he and Nathan Fitzgerald are back in Tacoma and back in Seattle. And they enroll Hyde Dunn, future hand of the cause, Hyde Dunn. And this is really this has happened in 1905. By 1907, they incorporate in Seattle. Martha Root comes about in 1908. You see what I'm trying to pull together? That the faith was beginning to spread across the United States, including in the city of Seattle. And this is why we have this, and you notice that little red dot is pointing there at Thornton Chase. And I just want to make sure that you see that little red dot on Thornton Chase's shoulder there. And so the Seattle community was the seventh community in the United States, because you had New York and Chicago and San Francisco, Oakland, right? Anyway, but I sidetracked here, and so now Thornton Chase is the one that confirms her into the faith, and Abdu'l-Baha, 1909, 1911, Abdu'l-Baha is about to arrive on his Western tour in this country. I mean, timing is everything in life, isn't it? And so I think that the early heroes and heroines of this faith really, because they had to wait, because in 1907, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, which by 1908-09, Abdu'l-Baha was no longer a prisoner. And so the friends from England and so on who had visited Abdu'l Baha by then in Akka, in Haifa, and they begged him as soon as the Ottoman Empire collapsed to please come. And so this was 1908, '09. You see, there was a lot going on at that time. So by 1911, Abdu'l Baha said, "This is it." And he had an entourage, and he was in this country then from April 11th to December 5th, 1912. Okay, 239 days to be exact, isn't it? So, so here we are, the SS Cedric, and you all may remember, some of us old timers may remember that Abdu'l Baha, the British Baha'is, wanted to make sure that Abdu'l Baha would arrive in style, and they bought him a ticket on the Titanic, and he of course denied it, and he said no, he was a man of no, not of of lowliness, and that he could never accept that. And when he arrives, and then he hears the Titanic went down, all the rest of us are saying, yeah, he knew about that. But this is the time and the era of the Titanic. So Martha now, May 7th, 1912. All right, so he arrives. Okay, we're with it. Martha arranged a public meeting at Hotel Shenley in Pittsburgh. So she's still in Pittsburgh, 1912, right? Where 400 people heard him speak. So Martha was just an editor and a publisher and a promoter from day one. She really knew how to put the word out there, and this stayed with her until the day she died. It's an incredible talent that some of us just die for, but she was there at the right time, the right place, where newspaper announcement and radio was happening, where slowly but surely she really knew just exactly, how to make this happen. So Martha had 2 private interviews with the master. Now, all I can say in 1912, whatever he said to her, it worked. Because clearly she saw from that moment forward, I think she clearly, because the divine plan hasn't come out yet, but she is so spiritually connected to him that I bet you, of course she meets him, more often, but I think that this was the beginning of the very beginning of the journey. Now, so she was 5'3", itty bitty little thing, 5'2", you know that song, right? Well, she was 5'3", she was petite, sure. She had gray blue eyes, and in her passport it states she's a journalist, okay? So here's her passport picture there, and here you have her passport, and it says it right there, okay? And there you go, and this is how we know, and that's her signature. All right, so now comes World War what? World War I, right? So now we are 1914, 1918. I've been lately studying a lot more about World War I. First of all, my grandfather was in Turkey in World War I, so there's a family, heritage that goes into World War I. But it's amazing how World War I, the impact it had on many continents, not just, obviously, not just Europe. So here we now have, she is beginning to leave and gets on her first world tour. And there she is. There she is standing right there in the middle. Okay, let's take it back down again. Okay. Oh, okay. So here she is. Where is she here? Hang on just a second. They're coming back to that. Here we go. Mustafa Rumi. So she's standing next to Mustafa Rumi, and there's a little green dot is right, on his shoulder there. And she begins to say, "Oh, Baha'u'llah, make me a Baha'i teacher." It's beginning to occur to her by going around the world. This is what she's going to do until the day she dies. They had to drag her off the boat, and she died shortly after. It really never stopped. But basically, in this 1914-18, during World War I, is when she begins to take off at a time that was very fragile. And can you imagine a single woman traveling during that time era? I can't even imagine it. And trust me, she did not travel first class. Now, she keeps going from India. She keeps going now to Japan. And here you have on the top with a red dot, you have Agnes Alexander. And of course, Martha Root right below her. And the very first Japanese Baha'is. And when you read Japan Return Ablaze, there's pictures in there, and they're all identified. I am beyond honored to share with you that Dr. Amethyst Husada's parents, and I'm not sure whether their father, who becomes a cardiologist, who lives right here in Bellevue, meaning outside of Seattle, becomes one of the very first Baha'is in Japan, and is actually still alive. Both of them are really aging out, obviously, you can imagine. But when I met them, and I didn't know the Seattle Baha'i said well yet, and I met Amethyst, and she's her husband is Japanese, and she's Persian. Her husband's Japanese, and I'd like you to meet my parents. And Peter and I both go there, and I said to him, obviously you're Japanese. And I say, "Oh, Agnes Alexander." And he looks at me, yes, miss, Agnes Alexander. And I'm talking about Barbara Sims, and the early believers, and some of that. We both looked at each other. He looked at me, and I looked at him, because all of a sudden we had Japan in common. Why did we have Japan in common? Because Martha Root and Agnes Alexander are buried in Hawaii. The soul of the Hawaiian Islands belongs to Japan. And Hawaii is very Japanese. And we feel extremely connected to the Baha'i community in Japan. So this is why I said sidetracked. But this is where these two giants meet in Japan, all right? Now, so eventually she leaves Japan and returns to the U.S. August 29th in 1915, right? So here we are now, just sort of at the end of the early year, right into World War I. And I am sure that, it had something to do with that. Now, her father crossed the continent to be there to greet her return. This is very cool. She was very, very close to her father. And the Root family, and I don't want to distract too much right now, but if you look in Wikipedia, the Root family is quite historic in American history. It is not her father, but I think it is the family of the Root family that left its mark on history.